Thank you so much for being with us this evening. You are live and direct with Stacy on the right. And we have so much more program for you. Starting off with Samuel Mangold-Lenett, staff editor at the Federalist, joining us to talk about culture in Hollywood. Sam, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me. How are you doing?
Great. I'm glad you're here because I need someone to talk to about exactly what you're writing about, which is Marvel and what's happening with the whole franchise. It's killing me.
Yeah, it's pretty insane.
Okay, so let's start off with the themes of revolution that are now beginning to crop up in this second iteration, because it's like movies 1 through 21 had a certain ethos to them. They were pro-America, you had traditional hero tropes, and they were very kind of encouraging, funny. You got resolution at the end of those films that was, you know, somewhat pleasing. Now we have a new kind of a bent. It's a new direction for Marvel, and it's much more politically tinged, it's woke, and it definitely has something, it's a message they're definitely trying to put out.
Yeah, no, it's definitely taking a far more, I think the earlier movies definitely did have, like you said, they were much more patriotically inclined. There was definitely an ideological message to them. And I think there was probably some more liberal messaging just by the nature of being, you know, Hollywood productions. That's always going to find its way in there no matter what happens. But they just went pedal to the metal this time around. It's full bore. It's ridiculous.
So it's kind of takes the fun out of it because I'm not looking forward to them anymore. I used to really look forward to the next Marvel movie, and when they would tease it, I would begin to think about what direction they could take the character in based on the last film or the last of that particular franchise. Like with Ant-Man, there were 3 movies about that. There were movies that were just devoted to Thor, which the last one, it doesn't even seem like it's about Thor at all. And not the Thor that we knew, who was a very manly man, you know, a rabble-rouser, a warrior, and a hero. And they turned him into a doughboy who was literally more inept than any just, you know, like librarian we might encounter. No offense to librarians. So there's definitely something going on.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, it's aside from, you know, all the ideological messaging that's getting put in there, the characters and the stories themselves just lose all consistency to the point where it's not even about really the actual character you're introduced to in the beginning anymore. It's about just kind of the aesthetic, the image of the character, to where it's just a vessel for corporate merchandise moving, or just a vessel to get the ideology out there because you're familiar with the character's name. It's a very cynical exercise.
It is, and anything that's cynical or an exercise is antithetical to the reason why people watch movies. Movies are a form of escapism. Obviously, they're entertainment, but entertainment where you get sucked into the worlds that these people live in on a much grander scale than something that's set in, you know, 1980s America or 2023 America or even any other country on this earth. These are places we're familiar with. Fantasy movies actually take you outside of your normal existence, and they cause you to suspend your disbelief and accept things that we know scientifically are not possible at this stage of the game. You're you're future casting, and you're also in a fantasy world. So you get to immerse yourself in that for 2 hours or so while, you know, engaging in eating of candy that you shouldn't be eating at all. And so it's meant to be a form of escapism. And with them injecting politics into it, I cannot escape if politics are being discussed, because that's what I do for a living. And most Americans feel the same way, even though they don't do politics for a living.
Right. And, you know, you mentioned the candy. I'm of the mentality that once you're in the movie theater, calories don't count.
Oh,
so
thank you.
I don't really worry about the candy in the movie theater. But no, you're absolutely right. Once people, you know, you're paying like $20 for a movie ticket nowadays. It's ridiculous. The prices are rising across the board. People can't really afford to go to the movies as often as they could, you know, even 2 or 3 years ago. And aside from that, the messaging just ruins the experience for everyone. And you're seeing, with Ant-Man in particular, there was like a 75% decrease in ticket sales the weekend after it debuted. People are they're sick of it. We're seeing that people don't want to be lectured when they go to the movies. We're seeing that people can't afford to go to the movies either. If Hollywood is going to I mean, personally, I think Hollywood is always going to exist just because there's so much money behind it. It's quite frankly too big to fail, in my opinion. But if it's going to, remain as relevant as it is, because there are now much more, you can compete with it much more effectively nowadays. If it's going to remain as relevant as it is, it needs to, drop the act.
Oh, I agree 100%. So let's talk about, you have another article, the most punk rock thing you can do is be normal. Yeah. Tell us more.
Yeah. I'm trying to think how to phrase this. Punk rock is it's a musical genre that is all about, the subversion of norms. And I forget the exact date of when the Grammys were, but Sam Smith, who's been a popular artist for a while now, he came out and performed this really popular song called Unholy, which, as the title might suggest, is pretty, supposed to be edgy. But the whole gimmick is that it's, performative Satanism. It's not, and it's not even edgy anymore, because the whole performative Satanism thing kind of peaked in like the late 90s, early 2000s with Marilyn Manson and that whole crowd, where it's played out, quite frankly. And it's no one in Hollywood, no one in like the glamorous celebrity circles is really subverting anything by being anti-Christian anymore. No one is subverting anything by being performatively, grotesquely sexual in public anymore. You're just doing what is expected of you. Mm-hmm. And frankly, my perspective is that being normal, just being a normal person who accepts their lot in life, aging with grace, having a family, doing your job, doing your duty, that is the most edgy thing by modern standards, because you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to resist aging at all costs. You're mm-hmm. supposed to reject responsibility. You're supposed to reject duty to your community. You're supposed to just be a perpetual child and reject all forms of institutional responsibility.
And so can we just talk about that, the aging thing? It's coming to light for me because this is the advent of my 50th year this month. I'll turn 50 at the end of this month.
Happy birthday.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it. And so I believe in perpetual youth that emanates from your personality, in that you are youthful if you keep in the proper outlook on life, which is every day above ground is a good one. So it doesn't mean I'm always happy or that everything's always going my way, but as long as I'm alive, there's hope for me to change things around, accomplish my goals, what have you. And there's also some of the things that I see some of my friends who are 10 years ahead of me, they're now engaging in being grandmothers, and they have so much more, there's a richness and a fullness to their kind of devil-may-care attitude about everything. But going right up against that is this new, it's like, it's so insidious because it's the women who are doing it. Men will say to their wives, do not inject things into your face. I think you look good. You're 60 years old and you look amazing. But the women in your circle, if they've already begun to inject their faces, then the pressure is on where you feel like, well, I don't look good unless my face looks like my friends, and all of their faces are puffed up because they're injecting, fillers into their face to make up for the fact that, you're going into your 60s. Now, I'm not quite there yet, but I see a lot of women engaging in this, and it's an all or nothing proposition. Your face is either puffed up like a pillow or, you're not doing anything. And men seem to be virulently against it if they're asked. If they're asked, men on the main, I haven't met one man yet who's like, oh yeah, I wanted my wife to get fillers. Most of them will say, oh no, I don't like it. They're now on the record on YouTube. There's videos of men talking about this, being open about it on podcasts, how they don't want their wives to put fillers in their faces. So when you said just now, Sam, that, being normal, not being overtly sexual, not pretending that you're in your 20s when you're in your 60s, and I'm talking about the clothing and the dress. In our 20s, we're so lax with our barriers and our strictures, and then by the time you're 30, you're like, hey, you know what? Covering yourself up is actually, it's a benefit to yourself and everyone around you. You grow out of that phase. People who are in their 60s who are still wearing super low cut gowns and mini skirts and showing off the bottom of their butt when they're wearing shorts, that's not cool. No one wants to see a wrinkly butt. No one wants to see that stuff. So being normal is actually really, really aggressively countercultural.
Yeah, I agree entirely. It's really a shame that it's kind of gotten to that point where you kind of have to, you know, even have a discussion about reclaiming this public sensibility.
Yeah, not dropping the F-bomb in public incessantly, like in restaurants and places where other people are nearby. That's now a thing. Everywhere you go, you hear people using the F-bomb incessantly, not once or twice, but every other word, and they use it at a very loud pitch, and it's so normalized that no one even thinks it's a big deal unless you don't use that. Then you're kind of like, it's like a verbal assault that you're to your ears. You can barely take it. So again, all or nothing.
Certainly, things have certainly gone sideways at some point, and I'm not entirely sure how to put the cat back in the bag. I think it's going to require a very large-scale rediscovery of, you know, morality and values. I think it's probably a multi-generational effort, but I'm somewhat optimistic because a lot of people in younger generations are resentful of the cultural decay around them.
Wow. All right. So, and I agree with you. I don't know what it looks like, though. Usually if there's a problem, I can envision some kind of a solution and what form it might take. For this one, I don't know, because the F-bomb dropping thing, which I say that it's not that the people who are doing it are bad people, but they've been socially conditioned not to see that kind of language as being a problem. And it's not just young people who have that issue. Older people have that issue. You know, middle-aged people, it runs the gamut, and it's just a symptom. The language itself is not deleterious to the point of it being a physical harm or a mental harm. It's a symptom of the larger cultural decay, which that's the thing that I'm most concerned with. So pivoting back to politics, because we could talk about Marvel all night, and we probably will have to circle back to it for just a minute, but you also wrote a piece about Vivek Ramaswamy. Now, he joined us on the show earlier this week. I've heard him speak in person. I've interviewed him multiple times. He is a genius-level IQ, wildly successful child of immigrants, and he talks about America like the days of old. But you asked the question, who is the Vivek Ramaswamy primary voter? Who are they?
Well, to be honest, according to polls, at least last time I checked, and now that he's announced his candidacy, he might be polling somewhat. Since I wrote this article, they don't exist. Well, rather, when I wrote the article, they didn't exist. Now they might, because he's announced his candidacy. People are now talking about him as an actual candidate now. Previously, people were just talking about him as someone who, hey, this guy should run. I agree with what you said. He's a very, very intelligent man, and his finger is on the pulse of a lot of issues. But, you know, granted, I take polls with a pretty massive grain of salt, but they indicate that, you know, Trump, since in February, he got a pretty massive boost, and they still show that it's, as of now, a two-man race. Should Ron DeSantis get into it? So I don't know. I think once debates come around, if Vivek qualifies, I think he'd be a compelling stage presence on a debate stage. Because, like you said, he's a very intelligent man, and when he does the media circuit, he's a very compelling guest to have on shows. You know, he certainly knows how to captivate an audience. So I'm curious to see where he goes. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with you that the polls are kind of like, I always look at them and then I get a little excited, like, what, that poll says what? And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. It's a poll.
Exactly,
this could be right. Or, you know, so then I try to pull back and be a little more. So I do quote them here on the show, but I do have a very tenuous relationship with them because they have been so wrong en masse before in very, very pivotal times. But something you said there, you talked about him not being visible in the polls before the announcement. And since the announcement, obviously, there's been some media attention. But was it wise for Vivek to skip CPAC in favor of this. There's like a donor gathering that's happening at the same time down in West Palm Beach, Florida. And so former President Trump will be at CPAC. He's going to keynote there as he did last year. It's a huge gathering. You have over 10,000 conservatives there, and these are movers and shakers who'll take whatever they learn at CPAC back to their communities. They disseminate information. They're heavy on Twitter. It's a place where you can make your bones in the conservative movement. And Vivek is not at CPAC. I'm just questioning, like, what do you think of him not being there?
So I don't think CPAC. So obviously CPAC is, it is a big political event, but it's not the same thing it was, when Trump was president, or towards the end of the Obama years. Mm-hmm. My understanding of the situation is that's what it currently is, at least. It's kind of lost a bit of momentum in recent years. And I think amongst the typical CPAC crowd, there's a lot of tension because people don't know what's going to happen once, hypothetically, should Governor DeSantis announce his candidacy.
Right.
I think also Vivek has been very diplomatic with with threading the needle of he hasn't, I forget which show it was, but he said he wasn't necessarily running against Trump, but he was running to further the Trump agenda, something to that effect. Mm-hmm. So given how he's positioning himself as not like a rival to Trump, but rather as the next torch bearer, I think probably fundraising with big dollar donors down in Florida would be his best way to spend that time. Because I think going to CPAC, which is very much a Trumpy event, mm-hmm. is kind of, stepping on his turf.
So it was a strategic move. It is interesting because I did hear those comments that he even said here on this show that if he's not strong enough and big enough of a man and candidate to be able to take criticism or insults from Trump, then how can he be the leader of the free world? So as running for president, he should be able to accept criticism from anyone, even if he feels it's invalid. I thought that was a good way to approach it, but the neutral positioning, while it does neutralize attacks, it also lessens the excitement around a candidate because people want to see the blood sport of the primary. People are signed up for it, and they feel like if you're running and you're going up against Trump, then you're going up against Trump, and let's see what you've got. It's an interesting dynamic. So what do you make of the potential Trump-DeSantis matchup? Because right now, Trump polls very well. DeSantis has not announced. But there's criticism surrounding DeSantis running for governor and recently winning handily and possibly leaving the state of Florida in the lurch should he, win the nomination and become the president in 2024. So there's a lot in the mix there.
Yeah. Just real quick, I don't think Vivek is necessarily worried about, the insults or anything. I think he's trying to position himself most strategically to, should Trump become the nominee again. I think he's positioning himself to be tapped for a vice presidential candidate or for a cabinet position. I don't think he's trying just to avoid confrontation. I think he's just trying to play his cards. I think, as it currently stands, I think Trump would, even in 2016, Trump didn't win every single state primary. I think in a recent poll that came out, DeSantis beat Trump by, I think, 5%, beats Trump by 5% in the Pennsylvania Republican primary that was held today. Then again, the actual primary is still a long way out. Anything can happen. I think Trump would win the nomination. If everything was, if every ballot was cast today, I think he would still win. I don't think he'd win every single state. I think it would be a bloody primary, closer than 2016 was. But I think he would still win because, he still has a 20% lead or something like that. He has a high double-digit lead on national polling. The base still very much rides with him. And he's, especially in this past month, he got a huge energy boost. That's not to say that, DeSantis isn't well liked or popular, of course. I think it was Brian Kilmeade who was down in Florida, but even Floridians are a little, seemingly a little hesitant to have a governor they love so much just kind of not finish out his term. I'm not entirely sure what happens in that case. I'm guessing the lieutenant governor would finish it out.
Yeah, I think so.
But honestly, I don't really know. I think Florida has such a massive political realignment that, whoever I think Florida is in good hands for the foreseeable future. I think it is such a solidly red state in the mold of the, America First mega political ideological framework that it could basically just run on DeSantis autopilot for a while. Granted, that's a massive hypothetical, but I don't think the country would necessarily feel uncomfortable with DeSantis running for president and winning, hypothetically, obviously knock on wood if that's to happen.
Yeah, it's a difficult calculus to make right now. It's still so early, but I love hearing what other people have to think about it because there just really is so much of a difference in this primary, in my opinion, the mood of the country, the mood of the Republican Party, the voters, and the kind of schism that has been created by, President Trump was very successful in policy, but in the terms of personality and being able to just live in everyday life as a Republican president, the Democrats never allowed him that. And so, they've kind of weaponized his own personality against him in ways that I don't think I've ever seen done with a candidate ever. And so it's just a new political climate. And so that means there's a lot of the predictions that we might have comfortably said, oh, I think this will happen. Everything's new. It's very unpredictable. It's kind of exciting, but it's also it feels a little bit like being on a roller coaster that you can't see any of it. It's in the dark. It's kind of terrifying, too.
Something that's also a massive feather in DeSantis' cap is his personnel has been incredibly solid. I can't think of a single, large-scale leak that has come out of his gubernatorial administration or any of his campaigns. Whereas, one of the biggest complaints people have about the Trump administration was the personnel issues, where it seemed like every other week, aside from, the Democrats railroading him, there was a high-level cabinet issue, or a staffer leaked something, or there was an anonymous staffer who was trying to usurp the entire administration. And I think it's going to be a big vulnerability should DeSantis enter the race that he can hammer Trump on.
Which will make it all the more interesting. I'm so glad you had time for us on a Friday night. We want to respect your time, and I hope you'll join us again, especially since you're up on Marvel. It's hard for me to find people who write for august publications like the Federalist who are also deeply ingrained in Hollywood movies and culture as yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. It was a blast. I'd love to come back on anytime.
All right. Well, we will reach out again for a Friday night chat. Sam Mangold-Lenett, staff editor at the Federalist. He's at Mangold_Lenett on Twitter. If you're driving, never fear. You can find his Twitter handle and ours over at SiriusXM Patriot. We'll be right back with more. If you want to join me, 866-957-2874.